So you're German, and your family had all been residing within Germany, and so I just wanted to ask you, what's your relationship to Nazi Germany?
Well, um, Nazi Germany to me is something that I don't really have a lot of experience with, and I can only recall stories that my family told me, my grandmother, and especially my dad and my mom. My mom was only 9 when the war started and Hitler moved into power, and she always recalls it very dark, horrible times. Also, my father, when he was 19, was sent to the Russian front, so when all the things were going on in Germany and the Hitler regime was reigning, my father was actually in France and Russia, um, fighting as a soldier.
So, like you said, you were always told these stories. Do you recall any specific stories that really moved you, or really gave you a good impression of what that time was like?
There's a lot of stories that I can recall that my mother and my grandmother talked about, and even my dad. They were, like I said, always very sad and very scary stories. When I was young, and my mother used to tell me these stories, I got very scared, and I always thought, oh my gosh, I hope this is not going to happen again. But she often recalled how they had to be so careful all the time about what they were saying. My parents and also my grandparents were very liberal people. I specifically recall one story. It's almost funny, but then again, it's not. My grandfather was very was a big opponent of Hitler, and one day he was so upset that he took Hitler's picture and hung it in the outhouse, and said that's where he belongs. He was just going to do this for a short period of time, and he forgot about it. And the law was that everybody had to have a picture of Hitler in their house hanging somewhere. So this customer came in to the bakery and said he really had to use the bathroom. They totally forgot about the picture of Hitler in the outhouse. So that person went to the outhouse and saw the picture of Hitler and reported my grandfather to the authorities. The next day he was called in the morning. He didn't even know why, and when you got called in like that, it was always a bad thing, so he was scared. He went in and they interrogated him all day about that picture of Hitler in the outhouse and wanted to know about his orientation and everything. Of course, my grandfather had to lie and try to talk himself out of it, and then they finally let him go. And he said that my grandmother always told me that he came home and he started crying, and he was so scared because he thought that he wouldn't be sent back home. People disappeared a lot, and anybody that had anything to do with any opponent party or seemed to be not oriented or whatever, little things could just cause you to be picked up in the middle of the night and you would just be gone. Um, that's one of the stories. Another story I remember is that there was a priest in our little town in southern Germany, and he was preaching one Sunday morning about how we're all one people and how everybody's equal. That was when they started the propaganda against the Jews, which was not a big thing in my little town because there was not a lot of Jewish people in the southern Germany, in our little town Schwäbisch Gmünd. But he was just preaching, and he was picked up during the night by the SS, and he was never seen again. He never came back, and nobody knew what happened, and it caused a lot of fear and insecurities in people, and people would just be quiet and just not say anything anymore because you couldn't trust anybody. People have to know that there were so many Germans. It was like a dictatorship. People were living in fear. At first, those pictures that are shown on TV when people are cheering, and that's all, when Hitler just moved in, there had been a big depression. People were poor, there were no jobs, and World War One wasn't that far ago, and they just were waiting for a savior. And they thought Hitler was that savior that would bring them jobs and prosperity, which he actually did at the beginning because he started building the Autobahn and he brought a lot of industry and a lot of work back to Germany. And that's why people thought at the beginning that he was the right man. But then it's crystallized out pretty soon that he wasn't, and then there was a lot of people leaving the country too. And a lot of people said there was a bad times coming, which was my grandparents. They were always saying we have a lot of terrible hard times coming. So at the end, it was like a total dictatorship. Nobody could say anything. Young kids were forced to go to the Hitler Jugend, which was like an assembly in the city square every weekend, where they had to practice and they were actually trying to brainwash everybody. So sometimes it hurts me when I hear people talking about Hitler Germany, because they really don't know anything about it, and they make all Germans look bad. And that definitely was not the case. There was a lot of people helping others to get away, to hide them. I could tell a lot of stories about that too.
So you would agree that the depiction of Nazi Germany and Germany during those times isn't completely accurate?
I definitely would say that. Because the Holocaust, everything has been Hollywoodized, and the movies have misled a lot of people. Like I said before, it is always said that all Germans are bad and they're all Nazis and they were all horrible and they were all sending Jews to the gas chambers, and this whole entire thing is not true. My mother, for example, never ever knew about concentration camps. There was only a very few people that were sent away, and they were actually not Jewish, they were German, because they were opponents, and they were told, and they said, well, they're going to some kind of a rehabilitation camp or rehabilitation prison at that point. The Jewish people, for example, like in big cities like especially Berlin and even in Stuttgart, which is in southern Germany close to us, that were sent off, where people did not agree with us, because they were friends with these people. They were Germans, and they were just sent away. But then they showed them these big propaganda movies and previews, actually, when people would go to the movies, of happy children playing, happy women sewing and making uniforms for the soldiers at the Russian front, and they were glorifying all that. They said they're helping our workforce and stuff, just to stimulate the people's minds. But the Germans were not stupid, so they knew that something was wrong, and they knew that something terrible was happening. But at that point there was no proof, because everything was done in secrecy. The only thing I can say that happened sometimes is that they had prisoners of war marched through the city, and they were working in the factories. And my grandmother always said it broke her heart, because they looked so skinny and they were so sad. So my grandmother actually used to go and have loaves of bread that she was hiding, and as they were walking by, she would pass out loaves of bread to these people, so they would, just because she felt so horrible for them, and they would hide it. My grandmother could have been shot for that. If they would have seen it, she would have been in a lot of trouble. But she did it anyway, and she said she couldn't sleep at night sometimes because of thinking about these images about these poor people and having to work all day and being treated so horribly. So, and the war times were just terrible, and the entire country was lied to. That's all I can say. And I just wish that people would open their minds a little bit more and put themselves in a spot like that, living in Germany during the war times and during the Hitler times, and being scared to death, not being able to say anything because there were spies everywhere, because people that reported somebody, they got money, they got gratitudes, they got all kinds of stuff. So there was a lot of people just for themselves to be safe that turned in somebody else just to make sure that they would never get in trouble. And they got money, like I said, or promotions and things like that. A lot of people are like that. If you bribe them, they'll do anything. There's bad people everywhere. And so it was just a horrible time that you couldn't trust anybody.
I really appreciate the time that you gave me, Mom, and your stories are awesome, and it was really interesting, and I can't wait to show this to Mr. Romanow.
Hi, Mr. Romanow.